we don't necessarily know what life's going to go through our way. Like that alone, it's an injury that you can't see, but it's one of the most difficult things that I've ever had to go and deal with. It's one of the most, challenging. It's been, people have to, you fight through those things. It could be financial, it could be marital, it could be, with family, it could be a health related thing. I mean, my message in general is, like a no excuses message, but I think it's also too, I try to go and say that like, there are always excuses. It's a never ending Mount. I think it's looking there and having that honest appraisal to go and say like, okay, what would it take to really kind of, move the needle in this area of my life?
Welcome to the Hard Way podcast with Joe DeSena, founder and CEO of Spartan Races. We're teaching you how to overcome your obstacles in your life the same way we teach our 10 million plus Spartans to overcome obstacles on the course, with insight from the smartest, most accomplished experts from every corner of the world. Get ready to elevate your life today.
Joe DeSena here, CEO and founder of Spartan, host of the Hard Way podcast. Got my buddy Kyle Maynard on the podcast finally. Quadruple Amputee, extreme athlete, two-time ESPY Award winner. This guy is an animal. He's a beast. He makes us all, I don't know, I want to crawl up in a hole and say, what the hell did I do today? I mean, you somehow get it done.
Everybody's got to find their own way though, right? I think that's what this is about. It's just like you say, sometimes life is a hard way. But I think that's when we learn the most.
Would you have it any other way?
Yeah, I think kind of depends. There's certain circumstances that come up that make me definitely, where like it becomes more evident, the disability. But I think as a kid, I kind of resolved the fact that I wouldn't. It was one of those things where it was like, just how many different things it's taught me in life and, brought to me that I wouldn't have had otherwise.
When did it really sink in? I mean, you were born with a quadruple amputee. You were born that way, yes?
My parents didn't even know. It was, the ultrasound technology was a lot different back in the 80s when I was born. So it came as a pretty big surprise. And I've got 3 younger sisters, and they're all born, totally, normal, able-bodied.
You're 5, you're 6, you're 7. When did you reach that, that critical moment where you were questioning things, if at all?
Yeah, there's a lot of special memories that I'd have with my grandmother, where she would go and, take me around grocery shopping in particular, and, out to lunch with her friends and things like that. She would set me in particular, where we'd kind of like just practice like meeting people. I didn't really realize that's what she was doing at the time, but it's kind of what she was. So she would set me in the front seat of the grocery cart, and we'd go up and down the aisles of the grocery store and just practice shaking people's hands. And she'd always tell me, she said, like, you don't know why you're born the way that you are, but, someday you will. She said that, God doesn't make mistakes, and that, someday I'll figure it out.
Did the resolve come from grandma? Like, where'd the resolve come from?
I think a lot of different sources. I think family for sure. My parents, my sisters, friends growing up, coaches in particular, I think became a really critical part. I think my life would have taken a very different path. I'd not had the people in my life that, allowed me to just be able to feel normal. Football coach in particular, just giving them the chance to play. It was dangerous. It was risky. I played nose guard. I was, 6th grade, 11 years old or so when I started. Maybe like, I think I weighed maybe 70 pounds then. And other kids on the line at that age were probably, some of them were twice that size. Kids would come crashing through the line, and I'd literally, would go and take, I played nose guard, so right across in the center. And when they'd come crashing through the line, I would take my helmet and smash it into their shins as hard as I could. And, that was like the way that I'd tackle people like that. I'd basically like make contact, almost, head down, head first, and then grab hold of their legs to go and bring them down. There were moments where I was like, borderline like conscious. We do Oklahoma drills where like my coach would maybe go up against, 5 or 6, 7 people in a row, and I was just like drilling people in my head. It was before, all the like talk about TBIs and stuff like that. Right. So it was like, but he was that type of person though, where he would just, that basically gave me like the chance to like succeed. And like, it was just pretty intense, but pretty special guy.
I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, had you not had the support network, had you not had those friends and family, it could have been a very different situation.
Well, I went to college, initially I was undeclared in a major, and then, started studying like broadcast journalism, and then released a book and, released on Oprah and Larry King, and like life, changed very dramatically, became a New York Times bestseller. And so, it was a huge, huge change and transition. Obviously, I mean, the people in my life have been enormous. I think, friends and family and whatnot. But point being, I think what I was on the path to do, I think I would have done something. I think it just certainly wouldn't have been nearly as physical, right? And obviously, you of all people in the world know of what physicality is about, and what it takes, and that it's an aspect of, I think, mental and spiritual growth.
There's something about moving blood and breathing heavy and sweating, right? Like just getting the engine running. It really helps you get through whatever you're going through.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think it's yeah, I've had a friend that stated, I think it's so true. He was a record-setting middle linebacker. He was one of the friends that climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with. He was undersized, 5'8", and like I don't know, maybe around 200 pounds as a middle linebacker, but was a record-setting middle linebacker in college. And like I think like 21 unassisted tackles in one game or something like that, and like broke like the school record, single season record. Yeah, the thing was just mindset, and teaching that, and basically like that's, I think we were connected and bonded so much, is just like his passion and desire to be able to go and like help people reach that point where they can go and unlock that. There's something inside of them, something there that like gives you that like fire, that drive to be able to go and achieve something, and then you have to go and set out to do it, because we don't necessarily know what life's going to go and throw our way. And I think that's why I love being around people like him. I love being around people like you. I think surrounding myself with people that are going to go and take on those hard things, and it opens up a different thing. I mean, there's things I learned about myself, through jiu-jitsu, through like climbing mountains. I set a couple of records in weightlifting in my weight class, and like those physical things, they shape you, they change you. I did a 420-pound butterfly press when I started with 5 pounds in each arm, and but I woke up the next morning and like literally, my left arm wouldn't move. I couldn't even get up. Like when I go and get up on the toilet, for people that they can't see physically, right? So my arms end at the elbows and my legs into the knees, and literally, just to like, I couldn't get up to the bathroom to go to the bathroom. I had to go to the bathroom in the shower that night, because it was like I literally, But then it's like, okay, now what am I going to go and do if my left arm goes down? I had an injury that I never had before this year. It's taken me out for like 6 months. I was just doing a normal, box jump workout, and like it was just like a regular, like not like a hard plyo box, but like kind of one of like the softer ones. It was around like, I don't know, I set it at 24 inches or something like that. Just doing that. I did a ton of repetitions. I'd done it before previously. I woke up, the next day or the day after, and my arm was literally like massive bursitis at the end of my elbow and swollen fluid. So, if I couldn't type, I couldn't, could barely write, could barely eat, and like, for an extended period of time. Recently, it's interesting, mentioned like the football thing. I'm wondering how this has happened. I've had like other, traumatic brain injury too, that I've been diagnosed with, from like knees in jiu-jitsu, maybe like dabbled, in like psychedelics and things like that for a while. And like those kind of things too. It's like there's a, good and sometimes like bad side to a lot of stuff, right? Where it's like, we don't necessarily know what life's going to go through our way. Like that alone, it's an injury that you can't see, but it's one of the most difficult things that I've ever had to go and deal with. It's one of the most, challenging. It's been one of the, like the hardest fights of my life, just to be able to like, get that back, where, you just never know. And I think that's what I love about this. I love about your message. I love, when I found out that I had the opportunity to have this conversation with you, I think it's just to go and, just teach people that like that, just to hear your perspective on it too, like what do you do when you're going through hard days and struggles? I know to go and create something like you've created, like it's not easy.
Yeah, it's not easy. I just was going through a little mini struggle 4 or 5 days ago. I was in Saudi Arabia, and I was questioning all the effort I was putting into that project. I have a chart which I can share with you and the listeners or viewers, that I believe we all go through on our journey towards success. And however we define it, it could be a relationship, it could be a business, it could be an athletic pursuit. But when we're chasing success in some form or fashion, we're going to go into what I would call the valley of death. There's going to be some real depth and despair, where we're not seeing progress, where it doesn't look like we're going to get there. We're questioning whether or not all this time and energy and resources that were spent were worth it. Naysayers are going to show up and say, we told you should never do this, because they don't want us to succeed in many cases. And most people are going to quit. And what I found is, just by having a map printed in my brain of that journey, has helped me not quit in the valley of that, in the depth of that valley. So that's what I do. That's where I was 3 days ago. I just said, I know where I am right now. I just got to put one foot in front of the other. I just got to keep moving forward, and I got to work my way out of this valley of death.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating to hear you say that, right? Like, one of the things I love is Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey. It's a fairly universal story, but it's such a powerful one too in so many different ways, right? Like so basically for the listeners that haven't heard about him, he's wrote a book called Hero with a Thousand Faces. The idea basically is that like all hero stories throughout culture, throughout time, throughout whether modern films or going back to like tribal stories, like all kinds of different things, right? Like there's basically like a common thread, that runs through every story. So like the story of Christ, I think, is an example, right? But like you look at that and like there's a bunch of other stories that are similar. The story of the flood in the Bible is like is another one. I think that like there's a bunch of other stories that are similar. None that are like, quite the same and exact, but like they're like what he did through mythology was like look through like what are the common threads through things. So every hero starts out in the ordinary world and then kind of like, has some call to adventure, something that happens, something that sparks their, like Luke Skywalker, right? Like he was just basically like working on, droids and, hanging out. And then like, all of a sudden, like he gets, like the R2D2, like, just happens. And like the whole history, it gives me chills of like, him and like, Luke and Leia, like they don't have any idea until like you get to the point where like later on through the story, right? But then he goes and meets a mentor, he meets Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then like, kind of like sets him off on his path. But if you look at like his story, and all the different stories, right? Like through this, like I mentioned, like the story of the flood, Noah, for instance, or like Christ. There's points of like, they call it the innermost cave. And I've been there before too. So literally the mountain that I climbed in South America, which is the hardest physical thing that I've ever done in my life, and bear crawling up to 22,800 feet.
I was there, Aconcagua.
Do you summit?
Yeah.
I would imagine, probably, yeah. So, it's just bear crawling that. I was like, there are points where it's just like, what am I doing?
You were in the innermost cave.
And so if you remember, there's a spot, so like in the summit day, you basically like, there's a spot like 800 or 900 feet before there's a summit where most people take like a, short break. And, you've already been going for several hours that day. And, you still have the rest of the summit and then the rest of that night to go to get down, or afternoon. For me it was night because just my speed is not the same as as a normal climber. And we took a break at that spot at the cave, and it was literally where an American climber 24 hours ahead of us that had fallen over, hit his rock in the head, or his head in a rock, and passed. And it was like the most, like I was thinking to myself, I was like, could I be at like a physical breaking point, where like the mental motor in my head is stronger than my physical body, where if I continue to go and push myself, like already you literally created something called the death race. Like you understand that as well as anybody in the world, where it's like you have that like debate, like, and I can't imagine your insurance policy of what you have to go and like do to like go and keep that, because it's the liability waivers, right? Because it's like the physical motor sometimes that's inside of us and the motor that's inside of our head. Like, what if our mind is stronger than our body and it literally forces us like too far? And I was sitting there, I remember like, been on the mountain for 2 weeks at that point. And I was, had a Cliff Bar or something to go and eat. And I couldn't even hold it in my arm. My arm was like, shaking so bad to go and, put it in my mouth. And I dropped it in the dirt. And I was just like, and I tried to go and like drink something. And I was just like freezing cold, could barely drink anything. And, still had like the hardest part of the day left. And I was like, everything inside of me was, debating that. And then I find out the name of that spot they called it the cave, because it kind of like looks like a cave. But it's the first time too that I could see the summit. I knew that I had just like, when I first started climbing, I started climbing in, here in Atlanta, Georgia, where it was like 800, 900 foot stone mountain. It was a CrossFit competition. And And I was like, I just have one more Stone Mountain to go. But it was, I had that like moment of doubt and debate, and where like every hero, you talk about those like moments of like, the time periods of feeling death and despair, where it's like you just, everything in you is screaming to go and stop. And I think those moments separate us. The point being with Joseph Campbell's work, like Luke Skywalker, it's like Yoda's gone, like everything is going wrong for him. It's like, you have this like moments of like doubt and despair. He's, literally being electrocuted by the, like, the Emperor. But that's when, something comes through because of like the arc of the story that he's barely aware of. That Vader picks him up and throws him down the well. Because I think what's what happens is that like, those moments I think define us as much or more than anything in our life. And it's not always the physical things too, right? Like it could be, in some instances, it could be, the loss of a business. Could be, you think about like what happened. One of my first time, when I started speaking, I was doing tons of speeches for companies that were selling subprime mortgage loans. And it was before like the collapse. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just going out there because, like, they paid me to go and give a speech, and I would go and, have fun doing it too. So it was like, there's times that I struggled with that too. But it's a whole other story. But, point being, like, you look at that, like, then all of a sudden, like, Lehman Brothers, like Wachovia, like the economy gets spun, into like a, tailspin, like everything that's happening. Like, it's just, this madness. But people have to, you fight through those things. It could be financial, it could be marital, it could be, with family, it could be a health related thing. You go to the doctor and all of a sudden you're not feeling great, and then you get a cancer diagnosis, and it's like, what are you going to do now? That's those moments of the innermost cave. And I think that, but on the other side of it is, something generally unimaginable.
What do you recommend to those out there, the regular civilians, to help them get through their cave?
So there's a few different things. I think, my message in general is, like a no excuses message. But I think it's also too, I try to go and say that like there are always excuses. It's a never ending mountain. It's one without a summit, one without an end. But you can go and look at it too and have an honest appraisal to go and say like, so if it's true, the statement that there are always excuses, then to go and like have an honest look to ourselves to go and say like, what is the biggest excuse that I'm making presently right now? Do something about that. If you were to go and do something about that, and it might be one where you have to like, actually, look, sometimes with high performing people, like their excuses are going to go and show up differently. And I think it's, sometimes we need that like view and perspective from other people. Sometimes, we have those blind spots. We can't go and see it ourselves. We go and see like what, is, actually occurring that's, going and keeping us from being that like, best version of ourselves. Like, it might be spending more time with family, for instance, or something like that, and we need other people to go and tell us, what that is. But that means, sacrificing something else, for it's always that. But I think it's looking there and having that honest appraisal to go and say like, okay, what would it take to really kind of, move the needle in this area of my life?
And then do it.
Yeah. And that then I think leads to kind of the next question and point too, which is I've gotten to be close and get to know very close with several former and current Navy SEALs. Obviously SEAL training and buds and whatnot is just, it was just, very like arduous and grueling, and like maybe like one of the most in, all of the military. But like you look at the results that they go and produce, it's incredible. And, they kind of thrive on the mentality of when things go wrong. This first SEAL that I got to befriend, I never met him in person. He actually passed away several years ago, and I know that he lived this until his dying breath. That his message was, not dead, can't quit. It was basically that, where it was, that's kind of what like I go to like in those like tough moments. His name is Richard Makowitz.
By the way, I love Richard. I love not dead. Not dead, can't quit. I love it. That is our message to our audience. That is the hard way message from now on. Not dead, can't quit.
I think his wife took over running. They had like an apparel company of some sort. He lived out in San Antonio and was just, he did just the Future Weapons show, right? Like several years ago on like the Discovery Channel, and was just like, he was also a Zen Buddhist monk too, which was amazing, right? So you got a Navy SEAL on one end doing this Future Weapons show, and then you have this like Zen Buddhist monk on the other side, and just like, he was incredible. Like also too, just very, very like, the time that I got to go and like talk to him, like, it was special, where it was just kind of remember we kind of argued at this point because I kind of like err on the side of like science and stuff, but he didn't believe in habits. He refused to believe that habits were a factor. Like there's nothing he could go and say like scientifically that's going to go and convince him that like habits were like a thing or factor. He said that like, they were just like something that like you just had to like do away with. Like you just routine and habit and whatnot was just, it was not a thing for him, which I thought was so interesting, that he operated with that belief system. But the not dead can't quit thing. So I think his wife took over. It's an apparel company. It's NDCQ. This not dead can't quit mentality where literally, I think when I'm going sometimes, especially when I'm bear crawling, so I'm down on all fours and, legs into the knee, arms into the elbows. Like it's just, so it's on a very like, exciting, romantic view. Try to literally focus on what are the 3 feet that are in front of me.
How do people find you?
The best way currently, I think, I'm kind of dabbling in like ideas of, other things I'm going to go and do social media wise and stuff like that. I've never been very good at that. I've posted on Instagram, Facebook, things like that. But the best way I think for other content is on YouTube. You just go to YouTube, type in Kyle Maynard. It'll pull up some stuff.
Name of the book for people listening?
No Excuses is the name.
No Excuses. Not dead, can't quit. I can't get that out of my head. I just love it. All right. Anything you want to leave the audience with?
First of all, if you're listening to this, thank you for being. I mean, there's no way that you're listening to this and not into living hard ways and hard times at times. And thank you for being that type of individual, because I think it's, if we have 20 or 30 people that like genuinely live that way, that might be enough to do what it takes to to set us on the right course for humanity. So thank you for being some of those people.
Inspire the world. Thank you for being a not dead, can't quit disciple, a no excuses disciple. I love it. Thanks for joining. We got to get together at some point. Love to have you out on the farm in Vermont in late June. Shoot me an email if it makes sense, joe@spartan.com. And maybe we'll get you out there and inspire some folks.
It'd be awesome. Thanks, Joe.